Hello there. I am Shamagoros and welcome to season 2 of the book replay. And for the first episode of this season, we'll be talking about a very good read titled Let Me Liberate You by Andie Davis. First, the preamble. So, season 2, yes, new year, new me, Our first season started on 7th December last year, if I remember correctly. And so by this timeline, we're sort of way behind. But then, if Netflix can delay season for like 3 years, who am I? Who am I to not delay that season for 3 years? Last season we had so much fun with some like great reads of varying lengths. I'm very, very proud of what we have achieved, especially with just a cloud of a plan, and with all of the challenges that we went through. I'm hoping that with a more concrete direction this season, we can surprise ourselves even more than last year. So yeah, this book, Let Me Liberate You. Little known fact, this is only one of 20 copies in Nigeria. Yeah. I managed to snag a copy at Ake Festival after I listened to Andie Davis panel, and I walked up to her. I was like, "Oh, I want this book." And she was like, "Oh my God, there are only 20." And then I went to like the Wida bookshop, and they were like, "Oh, all 20 copies have been spoken for." And I was like, "You know what? I would wait." So I waited until the end of the night, and there was one copy left, and I just quickly paid for it before the person came, because they were like, "Oh, the person did not pick it up." I did not want the person to change their mind and come and pick it up. So whoever did not get their copy of Let Me Liberate You, thank you so much. You have done the world a lot of good by, leaving this copy for me to get. I walked in when Andie Davis was talking about like the melanometer in this book. She was reading a section that talked about the melanometer of a particular crowd. With me and this story, it was love at first sight, a strike of the heart. So I really, really, really was happy to get this. And that bit where she was talking about the melanometer was enlightening, because I've never really had words for that phenomenon where you step into a place and you are measuring the average blackness of a place. I mean, in Nigeria, we're all black, so you don't get that. But by the time like you step into a place where there are like mixed races, you kind of like adjust a little bit, because you want to know if you are going to be comfortable in your blackness or not. Because quite frankly, a lot of time as a colored person on this earth, you kind of have to always apologize, make space for who you are. It's let's not get into that. And with all of the things that work together for me to have this book in my hand in front of this camera, I believe that the universe might actually be an intelligent being, because it was just magic. So with all of that rambling, let's head into the short review about this book. So what is this book about? The book starts by centering Sabri, a photographer from New York who leaves everything in New York to return home to Barbados to scratch an itch. Sabri hasn't been back in the country for I think about 10 years, and her homecoming carries like a lot of fanfare. And then she witnesses something uncomfortable during her like homecoming party, and her reaction ends up with her on a radio show inspiring a revolution, more or less. She kickstarts a national revolution, more or less. Now that's how the story begins. And then through the eyes of several characters, we witness how this revolution rolls out on the island of Barbados. It cuts through several national and social issues like are happening on the island. And while all of this is happening, Sabri still battles an emptiness and an incompleteness. We see how she gets through that, and then we now have stories from the rest of the characters that contribute to this story to make it as amazing as it is. And Let Me Liberate You is satirical, but on reading it, I discovered that it's more than that. I came here to read about how an accidental revolution will pan out, how this artist who really has like a lot of internal turmoil infects an entire nation with turmoil. But I ended up reading a story that cuts through the lives of a people, the citizens of a nation. It cuts through themes of national identity, self-determination, running. For 254 pages, the events in this book are quite a lot. It looks thin, but a lot goes on inside, because you have this multi-perspective style that actually allows the author to just fold a lot of drama into the story. And then you now have Barbadians being as dramatic and as fun and as lively. So you get all of that in here. And his writing is actually tightly efficient. It's very funny, and it's also very funny outside of what he satirizes. Her comedic timing when it comes to writing is really accurate. The dialogue is so beautiful, and this novel builds with a life that only a true daughter of the diaspora can bring. And at the end of my first read, I was already a stan. So you can imagine how I was howling out of happiness when I got a second read of this novel. If you're in a city where you can get Let Me Liberate You. Get it. It's so many things. It's a snapshot of Barbadian life and its politics therein. It distills the life cycle of a protest, like, what to expect and what not to expect. And it's also a journal that documents what self-determination for an individual, several individuals, a community, a collective, and a citizenry is. And for us here in Nigeria, I don't know how you people are going to get it because all the copies in the Ake Festival have been bought out. So I would say talk to your local bookstore, let them stock it. I'm hoping Book Boss gets a shipment of this soon. Please, Book Boss, if you guys are listening, it won't be bad if you guys get this book. Andie was kind enough to make out time for us to explore this novel. And it was an exceedingly satisfying conversation. I learned so much about this book, its subject matters, the country of Barbados, life in Barbados, and I locked in on the idea of self-determination, which I did not think at first was such a huge thing inside this book. And on the last idea, self-determination, it is one of the strong reasons I believe this book is something that every young person interested in organizing, interested in protesting, interested in development, and just, dealing with that inner turmoil. I believe that this book is something that they could learn a thing or two from, because in all respects, this book is like a manual for protesting. Like, that's if you ask me anyway. So yeah, get this book, really good book, and I will recommend it any day. So that's it for our 2 minutes, men and women. This is the end of the short review. Now, if you know that sitting for a book replay doesn't in any way impact your enjoyment of a novel, and in fact it makes you even enjoy it more. If you are also looking for points of discussion for your book club, in case you guys are reading this book, and if you are also seeking to understand some of the things that make this writing tick, settle in. We are heading into the wrong review. But first, let's talk about the author. So Andie Davis is a Barbadian-born writer, essayist, and novelist. She's a graduate of the Howard University and Harvard Law School, and she has worked as a corporate lawyer in Europe and in Latin America, all of this early in her career. Now she works in development and lives in New York. You can find her work on journals like the Caribbean Writer, the Delmarva Review, and you can also find her essays in Business Daily Africa, as well as her Medium. She has good essays on her Medium page. Early this year, she picked up the Frank Collymore Literary Endowment, the Premier Literary Award in Barbados, for her work. I think it's Fool's Die. I would put that on the screen for us to see. Let Me Liberate You is her first novel. And boy, am I happy that she was able to put this novel out here in spite of all of the work that she's doing, because global development can really be a lot, And so if you want to get to know her much better, but I think her wonderful personality at least, because throughout our chat, I did not really ask questions about her work. I have like 100-minute chat for you to watch where we talk about the book, we talk about art, and I just really enjoyed how excited she was to talk about literature, about like writing, and about the issues that she treated in her book. You could see that she's really passionate about what she does. So if you leave this video now to go and watch this chat, I'm not going to fight you. So if I think that probably you might enjoy this review when you have like a lot of context from what we've talked about. So yeah, that's just like a short story about the author. Now we'll be moving into the book. So you guys know me now. First, I like to talk about book covers. This is an awesome cover. Like, it is both pretty and it is truly thematic to the story and the issues presented in this book. This cover is very colorful. From a distance, it is very interesting. The light green, the red, and the yellow text. The contrast between the elements is stark, and it leaves nothing ambiguous, as you are not doubting what you are seeing. We see the palm tree blown sideways, and you can tell that it is windy. If this like painting could move, the trees will be moving. There is a monkey inside this green here. I don't know if you could see that. And this entire image here is very consistent with the island of Barbados. The designer of this cover knows that the title of the book is a banger, so it sort of like occupies half the cover. When I put this book across the room, you can read Let Me Liberate You in red across from a distance where you can see it if your vision is 2020. Really good design, really well thought out, carries everything that I like about the design. This red contrasts with this aquamarine and green. I mean, like, it's lovely. Here is the sweet thing about this title, is that this title is a promise. you know. And as a promise, it is great advertisement. You see, Let Me Liberate You sounds like a challenge. It also sounds fun. When I pick up this book, Let Me Liberate You, the first thing I think is that, who is this writer that thinks that, if I read their book, I will be liberated? Like, what confidence do you have in what you are writing to make this promise to a reader? As an essay, or even just a headline of even just like a basic internet article, this title is very, very catchy. It's what we call a really strong, catchy headline. They cooked. The operating verb here, liberate, is a very strong word, and liberation feels to me like freedom. And what else is more freeing than being on an island in the cool of the evening? There's no sun, so this place already looks cool. What is freer than being on an island in the cool of the evening where it is breezy enough for palm trees to sway? This entire scenario, if you were standing here, is exactly what freedom feels like. And to capture the idea of freedom this succinctly, in like this very absolute manner that nobody can argue with you, is just chef's kiss. It's just like just putting a cherry on top like an already very delicious tub of ice cream. Imagining that I'm standing in a place like this just feels like a session after my therapist, or when I look down at the amount of holidays that are coming up at the end of the year when I did not have to go to work. Honestly, this is like a 6/5 cover. It's pretty up there. And I will wear this on a black shirt. And even just the term, Let Me Liberate You, is an exquisite t-shirt caption. I know, my genius sometimes scares me. Now let's head into the text of the book. Now, for text, I usually start with the premise, because on the book replay, we are all about the premise. All of our reviews, our replays, they are always about the premise. So for those of us that missed season 1, you can check out all the things I say about a premise from our first review. I think that is a review of T.J. Benson's The Madhouse. But I will still go ahead and just give us a short definition of a premise. A premise of a story, according to one of my goats, Lahos Igri, the writer of The Art of Dramatic Writing, is simply the center of a body of work. It is that through line that cuts through the body, that central philosophy that the story seeks to prove, disprove, or deepen. The more singular and absolute a premise, the more cohesive a work of literature is, from a writer's perspective anyway. So like whenever I am engaging in a review, whether it is critical or casual, we always start with the premise on this channel. So what is the premise of Let Me Liberate You? So after the first read, it looks simple to me. Real change demands real sacrifice. And that was because at the time, this book was introduced to me as that, a girl goes back to Barbados and accidentally starts a revolution, right? So when I was reading the book, I was looking out for like how this revolution starts, whether it fails, it succeeds, how it ends, what it does. On my second read, I started to dig deeper, and I discovered that this book is more than a national revolution. It's kind of like a deep philosophical display of what self-determination looks like. And I discovered that even after talking with Andie Davis, that on the top there's like a revolution happening, but deep within there is also like a story of self-determination about a nation, the people, the individuals, and several characters in this book. And after our conversation, after reading this book, and on my third read again, I think I was able to develop like a second promise that even goes deeper than the first promise I created, which is that for change to fulfill its course, it has to happen without and within the elements in the system. Now, I think this premise captures all of the ideas I have been exposed to and all of the ideas that I have learned within this novel. Now, this premise can be shorter, it can be better put, but that will probably be after 3 months when I've really thought about the story well. And there is so much that this second premise does. One, it includes the change within a person, within a community, and within a system. And it also includes where self-determination comes to play here. Throughout this year, we've seen the demands for change sweep across the world. We've seen, in the raising of the Jolly Roger, we've seen it in Nepal, we've seen it in Tanzania, we've seen it in Madagascar. One thing that has been consistent is that until the change has seeped into the bones of the people and has become like a core part of their need for self-determination, in the sense that without this change like this, they don't feel like they are themselves. They don't feel like they are who they are supposed to be. That change will not be sustained. And one of the things that Let Me Liberate You does is that it simply shows what this journey looks like within and without, including the falls, the rises, the downtimes, the uptimes, and how the antagonists of change would move. It's very comprehensive in this show don't tell way. So you have to sort of like go through the story and feel the story on your skin before these deep philosophical beats of this story to hit you. This second premise also lends credence to like something I have been developing in my head, a truth somewhat, that change is one of those absolute things in this world. Like, change is even in science. Science calls change entropy, and it says the universe is just always trying to like change something. Change being absolute also sort of like founds the idea where we surmise that change is, the only constant thing in life. The absoluteness of change is not in its omnipotence, it's neither in its omnipresence, but it is within the fact that within the DNA, within the idea of change, is infinite potential. Oh God. So, and when I'm talking about like infinite potential, infinite because like whenever like there's change, there's an infinity of what that change can bring. The summary of the entire philosophical diatribe that I went on is that change, no matter how small, if it exists, even if it's at the littlest corners of a system, and if it is encouraged, it's not immediately squashed out, it becomes inevitable and it will take over. That's what I mean by infinite potential. And that idea is also demonstrated very well in this book, because change starts out as an itch in our main character's leather pants, and it grows into a national revolution. Now, just talking about this, there are so many questions that I want to ask Andie. In this book, we see how the several pockets of change in the deep crevices of the minds and corners of Barbados as an island coalesce to overrun the system. We see how just the fact that change is in the air, it gives a small community at the edge of the sea, the edge of society, a new gusto for self-determination. People change. There's a man who's kind of like unable to even provide food to his daughter that now becomes something even more than that. We have our characters changing. They are really like shifting things in their life, and they are sort of like not where they used to be, even though they don't really turn their lives around. And there are several flavors of change, It's not just people changing, it's also people being forced to change as their environments change, socially, physically. And the idea of how life hands us several opportunities to change as we live is mirrored perfectly in this book. The premise is so potent that the post-narrative space for this novel is incredibly huge. That's why I say it's a good book club pick, because like there are so many things to say. In my conversation with Andie, she describes this book as a plot that is traveling on a straight line, and then we have like several perspectives witnessing the events and the people as they unfold. It feels like a cylinder, because when you have characters start to witness other people and then you get to witness these people, it creates like a lot of nuance. And that nuance is very three-dimensional, because when you now have enough characters witnessing other characters, you now have like this very circumspective view of the character that is being witnessed. So one particular character, we see that character from several different points. We see how that character exists in other characters' thoughts, and where they even exist when those characters are thinking. The events, the dialogue, the human expressions, and the nature of the narration thickens as a result of this multi-perspective style that Andie puts inside this book. The last thing you want to do as a reader in this book is to skip a line, because you might just miss some serious character development. You might just miss some several ideas. That's why even on my third read, I'm realizing that, oh God, there were some lines that I actually forgot that are actually even critical to my understanding of a character. As for the plot of a novel, it is simple. Basically, the plot satirizes the return of a girl from New York to, Barbados, who she has the right idea and she somehow bullshits her way into starting a revolution. But yeah, this plot becomes so much more. It becomes this multi-tiered representation of change at a personal level through to a national level. It holds quite a number of surprises. I think it moves the way it does because Andie pays great care, respect, and attention to how she writes the characters, to how she depicts the culture. It's very authentic Barbadian. Instead of like devolving into, the road that is much more easily traveled, I see how the writing reaches its logical end, because the ending is not what I expected, but it was very, very satisfying. It allows the story to have what I think what is called like the fourth act. It leaves our characters at a point where they are starting new journeys, and the way and disposition in which it leaves them is in a place where you don't know if they will fail or succeed in these journeys. What you just know is that a lot of change is going to happen, because they are doing things that they have not done before ever since you have known them. That is such a good way to end a novel. That is why the novel carries such a rich post-narrative space, and that is why we were able to talk about this novel for 2 hours, and I still had like 2 hours left in the tank because I had a lot to say. Ending the novels that way is such an accurate representation of life, because our stories never really end, and we are almost always starting new journeys. Every day is a new journey. The next year is going to be a new journey. Just the way I look forward to seeing the future is kind of like how I look forward to seeing the sequel of this book, because there is a lot that I'm expecting. There's a lot that I want to see. I was made to care so much about these characters, and I was made to witness the truth of who they really are. See, this is one of those books where I think I can use to teach place and setting. Place and setting is something that is very, very easy to ignore when constructing a story, because sometimes whenever I'm writing a story, place and setting gets in the way, because I trying to situate the story in a place, because sometimes I just want to just move and just talk about my high philosophical ideas. There's no part of this text where I feel like I'm not in Barbados. Like from the gulls circling overhead, to the content of the language in the dialogue, to the ever-loving presence of the beach that Barbados is surrounded by. There are cherries, there is wind, there are monkeys. Even the arrangement of the houses, the trees, and the decor are incredibly Barbadian. Place is stitched into the story over and over again, as well as setting. Like, we already know that this is latest, at least pre-COVID Barbados, before the nation like leaned deeper into like a self-actualization. This is kind of like the beginning of that, because she conceived this story 7 years ago, so that is expected. The deployment of these elements of fiction, that's place and setting, even helps to like straighten the plots and weaves a stronger spell when I read this book, in the sense that the plot moves in a way that it will move on the island nation of Barbados, because of how I am feeling the reflections of this place. I am very, very into the book. I am very, very into this world. I'm very, very into this new universe. I am submerged in it. It really feels as if it's sort of like an essay on Bajan life at times, I look forward to reading this book again with the consciousness of place and setting. If I were to teach how to stitch place and setting into a text, I think this would be one of my picks. And so I would like to like read more and understand how like it really ticks on that elemental level. And the final thing I would say is that, the depiction of like the place inside this book is something that is not just achieved from like deep research, not just like a deep love for the place, but also when a writer feels like a strong sense of kinship and responsibility to the place, because that's what will allow you to really, really, really do this in text form. Because visually all you have to do is just do some decor, but in text form, the way it pays respect, the way the off dialogue narration pauses to behold Barbados, it makes my experience of the island in this book feel like goosebumps on my skin. So when we even get into the themes of national identity in this book, it now starts to hit deep, because I kind of know what I'm fighting for. I kind of know why these people are angry. I kind of know the things that have changed on a very, 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 very like deep level. One of my questions I wonder is that, can somebody actually really achieve this level of place and setting consciously? Because it's a lot. And then we head into like my favorite aspect of this novel, which is the language. I focused on reading this language so much that it distracted me from the other elements of fiction I was trying to like pick out when making this review. One of this novel's strongest aspects is the language. I mean, place and setting is pretty strong, but the language is it's good, because with the language, this novel bursts with life. First, it is consistent in the sense that the vocabulary in this book, it does something beautiful with words. Like it uses like the same words within the same vocabulary family to heighten tension or emotion in the situation and to reflect these different aspects of those matters. It does that without being stiff. We have long paragraphs, we have short paragraphs, and the rhythm of it is a non-stop beat that now also dances to the tune of the characters and the amplitude of the scenes. It does this while at the same time being incredibly funny. Because first, Bajans are funny and they are acting to find like humor in anything, as any culture ranking high on the melanometer scale would do. And with this, you expect some sort of like laid back, casual tone, but the tone isn't always as satirical as, throwaway as you would expect. There are definitely winks, so many winks, while you're going through it. The tone is also able to elevate itself when we get to talking about like the serious aspects and the serious issues inside this novel. When you hear satire, you expect everything to be laughs, but I found this satire to be at the level where it's funny, not because it's a caricature or an exaggeration, but because of that paradox that actually makes things funny, that essential quality of humor that makes us laugh. Satire here is at the level where high comedy starts. I'm laughing, I'm having fun, but I'm not growing stupider. Basically, I'm actually even growing smarter. This could not be achieved with a writing that doesn't have a strong voice. Because this voice first has its own character, it inflects a little of its opinions, but it is very true to the feelings, the perspectives, and the internal struggles of the character. It leans in when it's giving you the inner business of a character, but it doesn't do that conspiratorially. It's kind of like how, you are with that your one friend at a cookout that has made peace with his past, and he's telling you a story, but he's not emotionally charged by it. And the dialogue in this book is the best. All of the things I expect dialogue to do basically is to push the plot forward and reveal character. Good dialogue does that, but it also sort of like takes an extra step to witness the deep philosophies of a character. The dialogue inside this book is at that dramatic level where it could easily replace action. Like I found myself dramatizing the dialogue in this novel because of how kinetic it felt. And that's why I surmise that this book has a lot of elements that could make it a very good play. The dialogue is kinetic, it is varied in the way it flows, and it vibrates differently when you are reading out loud, especially from person to person. If I wasn't paying attention to the characters before, I had to start paying attention to the characters that were speaking. I just simply had to because of the strength of his dialogue. Someone cooked here. Delicious Caribbean jambalaya. Let's talk about characters. Now for characters. See, it pains me to say this, but I will not be diving deeply into characterization as I would like to. We already talked a lot about characters in the chat. Two, I'm trying to replay books without spoiling them, so that it doesn't like deprive you, my viewers, of the satisfaction of discovering these things for yourselves. Because there are so many satisfying things that this book is going to reveal to you. And then three, this replay has to be as short as possible. If I start talking about these characters, we're not going to leave here today. I'm serious, because each character is a human being that I actually just want to just gist about, so I'm just going to do, the essentials. So I'm just probably going to read from my screen. Usually in stories, I have come across characters that are, just human. Like these characters are so human that they just feel true things in their stories. As our culture is heavily individualistic, you find like these human characters everywhere. And, at the high level, the plot of, the story is generated by the conflict that these characters go through. So, you get character-driven stories. Even like in a lot of script writing lessons, conflict comes from character and character drives the story. So character-driven stories are kind of like really up there. There are also plot-driven stories, and in plot-driven stories, a lot of the characters are shaped by ideals. Well, they are not less human, but we don't focus a lot on their human attributes. They are more representations of the ideals that we are treating in these plots, and thus their characterization hinges on how they react to the events around them, and as they react, it reveals the depth of humanity. That's kind of like my favorite stories. In Let Me Liberate You, there is a balance of both ideas. Not just in like, okay, it's a little bit plot driven, it's a little bit character driven. It's more helical than that, like a double helix. Taking our main character, for example, Sabri, she drives the story. The first line tells you everything about how she drives the story. I mean, in the middle of an interview, Sabri starts to itch. And as I went through the story, I discovered that she's the kind of character that happens to a place. When we read the story, we see where that comes from anyway. Not from a sense of self, but she's also kind of reacting to a plot that has already been laid out for her. Everything that she is right now is sort of like a reaction to something that has happened. This also now spills out into the shape of the story where even without our main character that started the story, our plot is still going. The other characters are already living out their stories on the island of Barbados. Like, yes, their stories would not have shaken out the way it did now without Sabri happening to the island, but those stories will still have been resolved. In fact, it will seem that Sabri's actions and her return to the island swallowed up all of their stories and deprived us of the intricacies of Barbados that would have gotten if not come. For instance, Aggie, her aunt, would have had a completely different time handling Isilda if Sabri had not come into the picture. Because sometimes I'm just like, okay, so what if Sabri did not come to this island? What would Aggie have done? This is quite like a character heat map that I find very interesting and is very beautifully done. This multi-perspective and then like the several B stories that are happening, it ensures that we have lots of protagonists, and it is also sort of like the perfect structure for a story that interrogates why people run from place to place. It's also very good for a story that interrogates self-determination and why people run. They also fall on a spectrum where, like, the more proximal they are to their antagonist, the more antagonistic their journey for self-determination is to the premise of the novel. And this allows for a very realistic take on the community. And it keeps, my interest in these characters growing because I find myself rooting for these characters that when I discover like several things about them. So I'll be moving on to themes now. So of course, I've mentioned about the central theme of self-determination as it relates to like the individual and the collective, as it relates to all of the actions, all of the resistances and compromises that we make to understand who we are and what we must do to live in harmony within and without. So self-determination touches all of those aspects. We also look at the journey of change, where it starts from, where it flows to, the sacrifices it might entail, because real change comes from real sacrifices. We also look at the resistances to change too. Let Me Liberate You, it really does good work when it holds a lens to those who will resist social change and keep the status quo and why they want to do that. This book also taps into, the nature of artistic identification for Black and colored folk in a Western environment that seems not to know where to place them. And we get several reflections from that, and we witness the confusion that it can create and things that can happen. So those are like some of the themes that you're getting into. And of course, this book does a lot of showing. It also does a lot of telling, and the telling is beautiful. The off-dialogue writing is something. So like this is usually the part where I give like a literary discourse about the book, where I just like talk about like my own personal opinions. And this is such great work. The editing is masterful. And just reading this book, I sort of like appreciate every year that Andie Davis put into working on this novel, because I think it's truly brilliant. It feels like the manual for how to demand change. It starts first by recording the shifty, uncertain, and almost role-less mistake-reading beginnings of a movement. So it feels like a manual, and it also sort of like documents what happens at the end and documents the opposition that one would feel. The book also gave me like a very deep appreciation for Barbados. Like I read the book and I was telling the members of my super secret book club that, you guys, Barbados is heaven. We might as well move there after all. I mean, they said that a lot of them are like descendants of Igbo. So who knows? Might just marry an Igbo woman and go to Barbados. Might be in the works. I found this book to be very, very witty. The wit here is unmatched. And when it comes to like the idea of self-determination and looking towards the future, I think this book taught me a lot of lessons that I am still sort of like processing within me, because I have this delay thing where I overthink things before I say them. My favorite character in this book is not just because of who she is, but because of what she represents. I'll start by first what she represents, because my favorite character in this book is a character that continuously sort of like looks towards the future. Her name is Katya. She's Russian and she's an agent. And because she's about the bag, because she's trying to make a lot of money, when our main character comes into problems, she's always there like, girl, we're about to make money. She doesn't really focus on the past. She has this very laissez-faire attitude about some of those past experiences that otherwise bog her down. Just that's her really upbeat tone just really gets me high, because I think she is one of the funniest things in this book. Because it was a part where Katya calls Sabri and they were talking about like a deal, and she was like, oh, when I saw the numbers of this deal, I fly off the gym machine right into the lap of my husband. That line is not just funny, but it is also quintessentially explains the kind of person that Katya is. And I actually found this character to also be very aspirational. I was like, I want to really be that person that, sort of like looks towards the future. A novel that really centers like, the Black experience, but not in that perspective where it is all trauma porn, as my Nigerians would like to see. And it is all, oh my God, woe is me. But it is also very empowering. It's something that, it hits me deep here, because I began to see that while, the Black experience is generally not a very good one, but this is something that it doesn't just glorify it, but it also brings out those aspects of it that we should enjoy. And it makes me really proud to be a colored person, to read this. Reading this made me extra proud. Like I was already proud of my Black skin, but this thing just made me extra proud. If Andie ever sees this, I just want to tell her that this is really amazing work, and it's a gift that keeps on giving. I do not regret for a moment waiting until the end of the festival and consistently checking the bookstore. And I cannot imagine what I will be talking about now if I did not buy this book. So thank you so much, Andie, for bringing this into the world. Thanks to the editors that helped to bring this book out. Thanks to Little A that published this book out. And I really hope that this book gets like the praise, the fanfare, and the focus that I think it deserves. So these are like the few things I have to say about Let Me Liberate You as a novel. If your book club is looking for a read, if you are tired of trauma porn and you're looking for a read, Let Me Liberate You is that read that you're looking for, because the conversations that you can have, the post-narrative space that this book opens up, it's massive, because everything is accessible yet it's still very profound. And that is a balance that, I find very hard, because a book can be very profound, but it's not accessible. And at the book club, we have to now sort of like say, okay, so this is what this symbolizes, put this in this. And everybody's not like, oh, okay, we can have that conversation. But with this, you don't need to do that. And I really hope that my favorite book club really picks this up, So that's what I have to say about Let Me Liberate You. And thank you so much for sticking around to this time. But this book is something that after this review, I want to actually dive back in and read again, because I know I'm going to laugh. I know I'm going to see new things. Yeah, that's the book review for today. And if you haven't seen our conversation with Andie and you've reached this point, I think you should really go back and look at that conversation. We'll dive into the atoms that make this book it. If people don't talk to me about it, I will talk to you about it. So this has been the book replay for today. It has been our first episode. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and tell all your friends that we are here and we started season 2. So as for the next book that we are going to review, we are going to work on it. I have learned from last season that I'm not going to be telling you people about the things that I want to do. So that if I don't do them, people will not be like, Shama broke his promises. So this time I'm just going to think of it. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. And as always, it's been fun hanging out. It's been fun doing this, especially this episode. It's been really fun. So I'll see you guys at the next episode. Bye bye.